And the final thing, obviously, is this commercial framework. These roads are going to be designed to be commercially viable. Somebody has to manage them to ensure that the income on the roads are properly accounted for and returns are made to investors. And same goes for the power plant. So the other things, obviously, which I probably don't know how much time I have to go into details, but just think about it this way. There is a commercial structure now that's different from having done it in the budget. The second difference is there's a financing structure that gives you visibility to financial close, as opposed to what has been done previously. That hasn't worked. If you look at all these projects, on average, they've been talked about for at least 25, 30 years, and they have never been done. So through the PIDF, we're very confident that we can get through financing close that is extra budgetary and through commercial third-party contributions to finish the project.
All right, so how will this funding now be structured to ensure that it works?
Well, how will it be structured to ensure that it works? Like I said, first of all, this is the first seed funding. There's also more funding coming. And if you look at these projects, their total size of these projects in Naira terms is about 2.5 trillion Naira, or something over $7 billion in size. Now, the funding, about $7.5 billion, of which the biggest portion is obviously the Mambila power plant. The funding from the government, this 50 is the first tranche. There'll be more to come, where the funding structure we have is about $1.3 billion of cash injection. There are elements of Chinese loans that are currently being negotiated, I believe, for completion sometime before the end of this year. That will also be put onto all these projects. And then we expect that, reaching out to pension funds, insurance companies, other investors, institutional investors, both domestically and internationally, we can raise the remaining 11%. So there's a lot of smart people working on getting this investment memorandum out there and trying to get investors' interest between now and when we finish the construction of these projects, which on average is somewhere between 3 years for some and 7 years for the others. So there is a financing structure, 650 plus $300 million of NSI's own money going into it, as well as future contributions from the government and the funds we're going to raise from third-party investors. So that's how the funding is structured. And I believe that you're going to see significant momentum in all of these 5 projects that I mentioned because there's clarity to how the funding is going to work.
And when do you expect to receive the funds? And when will capital deployment commence?
That's a good question. We expect the funds to be with us anytime within the next few days. We anticipate the capital deployment to start within the first 2 weeks of June on these projects. Now, some of the projects are obviously seasonal in nature, in the sense that if you look at the Second Niger Bridge, you have to make the funding available immediately so that we can take advantage of the dry season in terms of making some progress. And by the way, there's work ongoing at the moment on the bridge, but I think it's going to accelerate. So we believe that there will be a significant capital deployment starting in June across all of these projects, at least the major road projects. You'll see some significant activity as we deploy the first tranche of capital. This is not going to sit with us for a long time at all. This is going to be deployed quickly because on that basis, we'll get the next tranche of funding and then we're able to reach out to third-party investors to invest with us. I am very, very confident that you will see, particularly those who live in Lagos who are struggling with Lagos Ibadan, especially the Shagamu end of it, you'll see some significant progress made.
Okay. So Nigeria's stock of infrastructure is estimated to be between 30% to 35% of GDP, which is below the 70% international benchmark. Again, the available pool of infrastructure are disjointed. How is the NSIA helping to bridge this gap?
Sure. No, that's a very good question. I'm even surprised we're about 30-35% because in reality, there are certain aspects of our infrastructure where we're way below those benchmarks, way below, even way below the numbers you cited. Specifically, you can speak to power, you can speak to ports infrastructure. It's quite embarrassing that a country of our size and scale will only depend on the ports in Lagos when we have over 1,000 kilometers of waterfront with actually about 5 other ports that can be made functional. And so we are looking at these areas for investments. What do we do? There are 3 pillars that underpin how we look at infrastructure. The first is NSI's own direct investment in infrastructure. And here you've seen us active in agriculture, you've seen us active in healthcare, you've seen us active in toll roads, obviously with some of the announcements that have just been made. You've seen us active also in power, gas to power, gas supply, gas processing. These are the areas we're making direct investments. Second element of our work is actually creating co-investment funds. We have successfully created a co-investment fund with the Old Mutual backed fund called UFF of South Africa. And we've made a few investments already. We're investing in soy and maize farm, along also the whole chain of processing. And that fund is also now investing in other areas, cassava in Edo State, citrus in Gurara. So that's a fund that was a 50-50 fund between the NSIA and this third-party specialist agriculture investment company called UFF that was backed by Old Mutual. Again, it's a registered fund. It's out there raising capital from third parties. We're doing something similar also for industrial real estate as well as middle market industrialization. So that's the second pillar, co-investment funds. We are going to be very active here because that is one way we can credibly attract foreign investments into the country. Now, the third pillar of NSI's investment in infrastructure is in supporting and creating financial institutions that will enable infrastructure investments. And here's what I mean. I'll give an example. One of the biggest challenges with pension funds and insurance companies investing in infrastructure is the absence of a credit enhancement scheme. The NSIA, working with Garantco, created a company called InfraCredit. At the moment, the equity is 100% owned by the NSIA. Co-capital, contingent capital is provided by Garantco. We are looking at bringing other forms of capital. This company's job is to ensure that infrastructure bond markets can become active. When you issue an infrastructure bond, they provide an enhancement that helps you extend the tenor and lower the cost. The first transaction they did was that of a captive power plant that was borrowing money somewhere in the mid-20% range. And post the restructuring by InfraCredit, their interest rates came down to around mid-teens, around 15-16%, from something like 25%. That's value. So we're expecting that this organization will grow and make the infrastructure bond market active and expand it. And that will enable infrastructure projects being funded by pension funds and insurance companies. The NSIA is also the lead investor in the Nigerian Mortgage Refinancing Company, which is helping provide lower cost mortgages to people. The NSIA is one of the lead investors in the Development Bank of Nigeria. And we're participating along with the Federal Ministry of Finance and the Family Homes Funds. These are necessary financial institutions that will fill the gap. And I'll also mention, finally, the commodity exchange.
I just wish we have enough time to talk more about it. We just have quite a lot to talk about this infrastructure issue. Hopefully, we will have you again on the show. Thank you very much for your time. Mr. Uche Orji, the CEO of Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority.